As soon as I grab that Louis Vuitton man bag and I turn around, I have 15 undercover agents popping out of the bushes. I look up in the sky and there's a helicopter. And the FBI would put me in handcuffs that day and arrested me. And some people say, hey, were you nervous? You're gonna go to prison? The cartel's gonna know that you got busted? But you know what, Matthew? I was relieved. It was finally over.
Welcome to this week's Escape Your Limits podcast. Today's guest went from athlete to outlaw and back again in a transformation that redefines what it means to escape your limits. After building an underground empire connected to one of the world's most feared cartels, a prison sentence forced him to confront who he really was. Inside a prison cell, armed with only basic commissionary items like salt and protein powder, he reversed engineers his vision, crafting one of the first batches by hand and setting the foundation for what would become muscle on a stick. A protein-packed ice cream born in confinement and now gaining traction in gyms worldwide. So please make some time for this week's episode of the Escape Your Limits podcast with the California kid, Mr. Owen Hanson.
Owen, let's start at the end. Take me back to the day you were arrested. Where were you and what was going through your mind?
Matthew, I was in Carlsbad. I was going about 100 miles an hour, leaving from my Beverly Hills house. And I was just flying. And I had a golf tournament, or it was a golf match against a guy that was working in the money laundering business for me. And I was a little late, so I got on that carpool lane and I just took off. And I said, man, no one's stopping me. You know, I got no worries in the world. But I knew there was a funny feeling that something bad was gonna happen. And I was driving in that carpool lane, and I remember I ended up getting to the country club earlier. And I was like, okay, I have a 7 a.m. tee time. It's like 6:15, 6:30. I said to myself, man, I'm gonna go to McDonald's, get myself an orange juice and an egg muffin, right? And I said to myself, well, maybe I'm meeting up with the feds today. I just had this funny feeling. And I said to myself, maybe I should just take off and go to Mexico, where I have the cartel that is my boss, you know. Maybe I can go and stay over there at a stash house and take this encrypted phone and run over it with my tire, right? I talk about it in the book, you know. I'll just run over it with my Porsche tire, break it, and flee to the stash house in Mexico. And I remember thinking, you know what? Fuck it. I'm just gonna go back and face the music. And I had a feeling that it was my day, and I got that message. I got a call. The guy was in the clubhouse. He says, where you at? He says, I'm in the clubhouse waiting for you. And I was like, okay. So I drove back to the country club, and I remember getting out of my car thinking, why is no one here? There's no cars in the parking lot. This is like one of the most famous golf clubs in San Diego. You know, we're talking $300 a round. Like, why is no one in the parking lot? So I looked around, and the caddy comes and grabs my clubs, and I say, hey, caddy, where is everybody? He goes, I don't know, Mr. Hanson. So I walked to my driver's side, and I opened the door, and I grabbed my man bag with my 3 encrypted phones and $30,000 to $50,000 in there because I was going to gamble. And I was supposed to, you know, discuss our next money transfer with this money laundering guy. And as soon as I grab that Louis Vuitton man bag and I turn around, I have 15 undercover agents popping out of the bushes. I look up in the sky and there's a helicopter. And the FBI would put me in handcuffs that day and arrested me. And some people say, hey, were you nervous? You're gonna go to prison? The cartel's gonna know that you got busted? But you know what, Matthew? I was relieved. It was finally over.
What was the moment when you because my guess is that it happened so quickly that you didn't really get a chance to fully recognize what was going on. What was the moment when it dawned on you, I guess, the scale of the situation that you were in at that point?
The whole time when I had those handcuffs on me, I was saying, okay, I'm a bookmaker. I hope this is for being a bookie, right? I'm like, okay, please be for bookmaking. Please be for bookmaking. Because you got to remember, a bookmaking charge, you're looking at maybe 2 to 3 years at the most. But if they knew that I was working for the cartel, you know, you're looking at a life sentence, 20 years, you know. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, are they arresting me for the bookmaking? This is what I'm praying, right? I'm saying, come on, Lord, please be, this is just bookmaking, please, please, please. And I talk about it in the book, the day it's crazy. You sit down in the back of these undercover cars, and the whole time you're so aware of your senses. You're listening to the two guys talking in the front, and I'm watching the guy that's next to me and holding me in my handcuffs, and I'm just being very aware of the situation, right? I'm listening because I'm just trying to figure out who's in the room, right? Who's in this car. And I heard this Australian accent. And I said to myself, fuck, this is for the drugs, right? I said, my life's over. And I knew when I heard that Australian accent that this is only one thing that they're here for. They're here for the distribution of cocaine. They don't care about the bookmaking. And I knew right then and there, I said, well, there's my life. It's over. I was 32 at the time. And I was like, that's it. Might as well say goodbye to my family. I'll never see my dad. I'll never see my mom. My ex-wife, my girlfriend, my best friends from school, my teammates, it's over. It was a pretty shitty feeling.
When you go through situations that seem as though they're the end of the world, and I guess that is an extreme example of that, like, where do you go to in your mind? Do you quickly think about, all right, well, this is the worst can happen, and then attempt to get your head around the worst case scenario? Where do you get certainty from in that moment? Or where did you get certainty from?
When they put me in that 6x8 cell, and I tell people, you realize that this is as low as you can be. I talk to people about it. Like, imagine going to live in a bathroom and putting a set of bunk beds next to the toilet seat and having your head next to that toilet seat and having a bunkie, or a cellie we call it in prison, come down to use the bathroom at 2 a.m. and being woken up by the stench of his feces, or having him pee and it's spraying on your face. Like, it's unhumane, right? So you're at your all-time low. But I say, do we give up? Do we go eat soup and sit on this bed all for the rest of my life? Or do we do something about it and make the best of a shitty situation, right? And it took me a couple weeks. Trust me, I was, on my bed just going, my life's over. You want to cry, and you're remembering as a kid, your dad told you, we don't cry as men, and you're just trying to be strong and tough for your family, and you just want to break down. My mind, I'm not going to lie, my mind's still gone. It's still fried. It's still traumatized from that arrest. And I don't know if it'll ever be better completely, right? So, the first couple of weeks, you're just trying to digest what's going on. You're going to see your lawyer, and you're seeing discovery on what they have on you. And you realize, okay, I was working with an FBI informant. Okay, this guy is telling on me that worked for me. So you're seeing the whole picture, and you're seeing everything go down, and it's just you realize these guys have been watching you for 5 years, right? So they got 5 years of discovery on you. I think it was 3 terabytes, and you're just amazed that they're using every resource to take me down. I didn't think I was that big of a deal. You don't realize you're a kingpin until you're getting charged with a kingpin role, and it's something it's very scary. And you realize your sentence just went from 10 years to 20 years, maybe a life sentence. So for lawyers to come and tell you that you're looking at life, and I'm a kid that's never been in trouble, never had a parking ticket, it's a hard pill to swallow. And weeks and weeks go by, and you're just realizing, like, do you just give up, or do you keep fighting? And I decided to keep fighting, just like I've done my whole life. So what do? Fitness has been around my entire life. I start doing push-ups off the toilet seats. I start doing dips off the back of the toilet. The sink, I'm doing these tricep blasts where I'm constantly just working my triceps. And I'm doing jumping jacks. You got to remember, we're in a 6x8 cell, so you got to get, you have to be able to get creative, right? And, the food is terrible. It's all carbs. So you're trying to figure out a way to maintain your health as clean as you can, So They sell commissary. On the commissary, they sell mackerel and tuna and stuff that I would never eat on the street. I would never eat a mackerel. I used to fish with mackerel with my father. How am I going to start eating it? But at the end of the day, it's a survival mechanism, right? So I'm going to clean those mackerel, and I'm going to put a little sriracha on it, and I'm going to throw some peanuts on it, and I'm going to make it taste good. So when it goes down, I just realize that I'm just feeding my body for protein. I'm not thinking that I'm at Mastro's Steakhouse or some Greek restaurant or some sushi spot. I'm just eating to fuel my body, and that was my mindset. Drink a gallon of water a day, eat 7 mackerel, and you're going to get 20 grams of protein off each mackerel. So that's 140 grams of protein you're going to get. A guy that's 220 pounds needs 220 grams of protein, but obviously it's not physically possible because you're only allowed to spend $300 a month. So it was a very difficult task for me, and it was hard to digest. But the way I kept my mind going is keep working out, keep pushing, never give up.
One of the things that I've read and learned over time is when people are going through difficult situations, similar to yourself, or different degrees, that finding something or finding a small element of hope is what keeps people sane and gets people going through. I remember the book Man's Search for Meaning, about the German concentration camps and the people that got through and the ones that didn't. Where did you find, clearly you must have found some hope in this situation. What if you did, what was that hope that you clung on to almost want you to build yourself and stay strong and do the workouts that you were doing?
The hope came every time my lawyer came. He says, you're looking at 30 years, right? I'm like, I kept staying optimistic. I was like, is it possible to get 10 years? Like, oh man, your charges are pretty tough to get 10 years. I'm like, well, what do I got to do to get 10? And there's all these questions like, okay, well, let's see what your co-defendants get. No one on my case got more than 5 years. So maybe it's possible that I get double of what my co-defendants. So I kept staying positive in that way, like staying optimistic, because I wanted that 30-year number to go away, right? And then they talk about extradition, being extradited to Australia and doing more time over there. I'm like, well, aren't we pleading guilty for the same charge in the U.S.? These lawyers try to scare you. They want to just take your money, right? So they're like, oh, well, that's an Australian matter. We're going to have to hire someone from Australia. But why would it be an Australian matter? It's in the U.S. I'm a U.S. citizen, and I'm shipping the products from the U.S. to Australia. So let's make it one case, right? So you have all these different obstacles that you're facing. Lawyers asking for money, private investigators asking for money. Then you got to deal with prison politics. My best friend on the streets are black. Guess what? When you go to prison, you can't talk to blacks. You can't eat with them. You can't chop it up with them. It's not allowed. So for someone that's been an athlete his whole life, that's played with African Americans, Hispanics, and now you're telling me that I'm not allowed to eat with these people? My co-defendant, for instance, black, and he's in the same prison as me. We used to chop it up every day on the street, having ceviche, steak, whatever it may be. And now all of a sudden, I got to stop all that. It's not right, but it's prison. And going to prison, there's a lot of different ways you got to look at life, and there's a lot of politics involved.
I'd like to go back to USC football. So you in your early days, you was an athlete, played under Pete Carroll. Is that correct?
Yeah, Pete Carroll, the best coach I've ever played for. Just a player's coach. Energy like no other. I must say that I never played the game in my life, right? I went there on a volleyball scholarship, and I was fortunate enough to walk on and be part of 2 national championships. So being able to be part of that camaraderie of a team with 110 guys that you're willing to take a bullet for, guys that you would call any time of the night is a feeling that I've never had. It's a family that I've never been part of, because my mom left when I was 8 years old. So I never really had that family. I had my father and myself. So when I had this brotherhood, playing with guys that are, future NFL Hall of Famers and Heisman Trophy winners, it's a pretty surreal feeling, right? It's like, how did this kid from Redondo Beach, whose dad was a construction worker, walk on to one of the greatest football teams of all time? Like, it's unreal, right? But I think it was my athleticism. My whole life, I've been playing sports, whether it's basketball, baseball, volleyball, soccer, everything. But my parents never allowed me to play football. They said it's too dangerous of a sport.
Are your members frustrated by long lines for squat racks? Equipment like squat racks are in high demand. There's a new solution that will allow your clients to train all the major muscle groups, reduce wait time, and improve your overall gym's efficiency. Curious to know more? Then contact us today.
So that day when they asked me to walk onto the football team, I thought about my dad. I thought about my mom saying, "You're never allowed to play football because it's dangerous." And I said, well, guess what? I'm an adult now. Like, what are they going to do, right? So I said, you know what? Let's try. Why not? And being part of that team was just, for the rest of my life, it was like my golden ticket anywhere I went. I had that national championship ring. I could get a job working for a USC guy. I could get in the finest restaurants. I could get in the best clubs. And it was just like rolling out the red carpet anywhere you go.
What was it like to be part of that high-performing team? How did that shape your outlook on your life at that time?
At that time, it just brought you to a whole nother level, right? You're around the hottest clubs in Hollywood. You're around A-list celebrities, Paris Hilton, Kim Kardashian. These guys are dating my teammates, right? So you feel like you're the man, right? Like, even though I'm a third string tight end, it doesn't matter because these are my brothers, and they're going to take me with them, and we're going to ride together, and we're going to be part of this Hollywood atmosphere. So it was a pretty unreal feeling for sure. But I kept chasing that, right? So my friends are going to the NFL making $20 million contracts. And what am I going to do? I'm not good enough for the NFL. So I have to figure out a way to make that money so I can feel like I'm part of them still.
Do you think that competitive mindset was part of what caused you or drove you to look to do other things outside of the sport? And I guess, was that part of how your journey started because you just wanted to win and wanted to be better? Or how have you, when you look back on that time, what are some of the characteristics that you spotted that could be looked as positive, but maybe if you look back, you may have gone down a slightly different direction?
Yeah, you have to relate it to athleticism and being a competitive athlete, right? Because my whole life I've been competing. I've always wanted to win, right? I used to play my friends in basketball one-on-one, and I'd play my heart out, just to beat them, right? Just for a burrito in junior high, right? Just I want to win so bad, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes, So once I got to college and I'm on the best national football team in the world, right? For college football, it just kept going, right? So I graduate and I get a job working for a big USC alumni, and I lose that job, and I become a bookmaker, which is a bookie, taking bets for sports, and that competitiveness is like, I want to win, right? I want my player to gamble as much as they want, and I want them to lose so I win, right? And in that whole sense became my life. It was competing against 2,000 customers that gambled with me. I want to beat them. I'm going to charge them $110 to bet 100. So they're risking $110 to win 100 from me. I have a 10% edge, so I know I can't lose, right? It's a numbers game. And the same thing when it became working with the cartel and moving cocaine. It's like I'm competing against the DEA now, the FBI, and I want to be able to do things that they won't be able to catch me doing, whether it's sending cocaine in chocolate where they can't find it, or in wine bottles, or taking a boat in a submarine and taking under the water. And I feel like I'm competing to be able to beat them. Like, catch me if you can,
So let's go back to this bookie thing, because clearly to be able to look at numbers, ratios, probability, that's got to come from somewhere. Like, where you clearly had some sort of mathematical skill, or maybe where did that come from, and how did that drive what you ended up, what you did in that particular situation, and talk me through the sort of that bookie model, because it's something like my wife told me about this, saying it would just be a great thing to teach my kids to be good at maths, because they both don't like math, and I'm saying to them, look, math is important for everything, but the way it's taught in school is quite boring. So how did you get excited about math? And
I would say it started like 7th grade, and it started with gambling, right? So I used to play this game called quarters, and I'd take a quarter and I'd bet my friends that I could throw the quarter against the wall closer. It was a handball court. So we'd be in grade school and I'd take the quarter and I'd throw it against the handball court. And my friend would throw his, and mine would always be closer because what I did was a month before I practiced against my grandmother's garage, and no one knew I was doing this, right? So I got good enough where I could land this quarter so close to that wall, the handball wall, that I would win every time. And that's where I realized, okay, I'm taking 25 cents and I'm turning it into 50 cents. And the next guy comes up and I'm taking 25 cents again and turning it into 75 cents. And I'm just learning like, okay, 25, 25, 25. I'm learning how to make money. And it's just, I'm making 100% return on my money as long as I'm getting it close to that handball court. And of course, sometimes people would be like, oh man, he's going to win every time. So you got to lose a couple times just so you feel like you can get their gambling side back, with you. You don't want to beat them every time because they're never going to play you again. So, the gambling started with the quarter game. And then I remember my dad was a Division I basketball player. So I remember telling myself, my next hustle will be playing people one-on-one in basketball. But I need to practice. So I went to my dad and I said, Dad, every time you come home from work and we play basketball at Grandma's house, and he'd come over to Grandma's house and I'd just be shooting hoops. I'd be running layup drills, and my dad would whoop my ass every time. He'd beat me. He was a Division I athlete, right? So he's shooting threes, drilling them, and I'm like, man, I can't beat my dad. But I'm playing against a Division I athlete that's, at the time, he's 38, 40 years old. And I go back to junior high and I go play my friends, and it's easy, right? I'm playing against guys my age that are 11 years old. I'm not playing against some guy that's full grown and that's a Division I athlete. So I'm whooping them. And I have to make it so they want to gamble with me, right? So what I did was, at lunchtime, you get a tray full of food, right? You get your burrito, a bag of chips, and like a juice box. So I had to figure out something that would be interesting for them to gamble. So I had to give them odds. And I knew that if I offered my whole tray with a burrito, a drink, and a chips, that's more intriguing to them than their burrito. So I would say, hey, I'll give you my whole tray if you beat me. But if you lose, I just get your burrito. So they're like, oh, no brainer, right? So, okay, so that's just simple math, right? Like, you're offering something that's appealing to someone. And if they lose, all they have to do is give their burrito. But to me, I want that burrito. I'm trying to gain weight. I'm an athlete, right? So I'm trying to eat as much food as I can. So that's where that mentality started. And that's where I started to learn numbers. And then when I got to high school, I was, number one in my class in algebra. And I became so good at numbers that everything was about numbers, about money, counting dollars, counting quarters, whatever it may be. And I used it everywhere. I went to prison, obviously, and I used it with my businesses there. I had a ceviche business. I had an ice cream business. I had a store business where I could charge 30% a week to loan money, like a loan shark. So I used it. This model just worked everywhere in life. And I remembered myself like, you're telling me I could have a store in prison where I have mackerel, chips, soda pops, candy, and I can give you something for 1 week and make 30% return on my money? Like, let's do the math on that. 30% times 4 weeks, that's 120% return on your money in a month. No one even does that in a year, let alone. So I'm like, okay, this is a good business, right? Like, making 30%, I can afford to even have people stiff me and I'm still winning. So that's what I started doing. And when I went to prison, I started a store and I was able to loan shark the money at 30%. And it just grew, And it just, for me, it's just a numbers game. And a lot of people don't understand numbers.
It's an important lesson. And I'm sure being able to tell the story to kids in school for two reasons. One, why it's important to learn math, and maybe then how to apply it in a business that probably doesn't get you into trouble.
Any business, right?
Any business. But so just going back to your bookkeeping business then. So one of your skills clearly is numbers and understanding numbers. The other thing is, like, when you had the business, you obviously started with a few friends, from what I understand, and that scaled into quite a big business where it was almost like an international, in some respect, where your clients were coming to you. What are some of the skills that were important outside of the understanding the numbers and the ratios and giving people a great deal? What were some of the other skills that you had? Because there must have been
sales and marketing, customer service in some ways. There was a story that I listened to about the way that you approach some of your customers. Give us a little bit of an overview for that, because I think that's relevant to any business today. And you clearly had a good instinct about some of those things.
I tell people the number one thing is networking, right? You go to USC and what do? You want to network with the people around you, and you want to use those contacts for the rest of your life. You never know when you're going to need some guy that's family owns a chocolate business, or family's a CEO of Sony, right? Or dad's a lawyer. You never know where you're going to use these people. So you always have to save the contacts that you have, because one day they might come in handy. And I was really good at delegating different people, different positions in the company. As the bookmaker, I know I can't handle all my customers, right? That would be impossible. So if you, Matthew, had 50 people in the UK that are willing to gamble, I'm going to come to you and say, why don't you handle those people in the UK, since those are your contacts, and I'll pay you a percentage based off of what they lose. And that can range from 20% to 50%. But for you, that's great, because I'm the house. I'm backing the bets. And I know in the end of the day, no one can beat the house, right? Vegas is beautiful. They're never going out of business. You go to the Wynn, the Aria, the Bellagio. Beautiful, right? It's all built off of gambling money. So I know that mentality is you can't beat the house, so I can offer you a 50% commission. So I'll say, hey, Matthew, I want you to get me 50 customers. If you get me 50 customers or more, you get 50% commission. So if your customers lose 100,000 combined, you collect the money, you pay out the winners, and whatever's left over, we split it down the middle. And it's just business 101. And I know if I can do that in 50 states of the United States, my business will grow. And if I know I can go international into Mexico, Peru, Colombia, wherever it may be, we can be an international sports book. And that's what ended up happening.
Do you know how many clients or countries that you're in, to put some scale on that business?
Yeah, I was in 3 different continents: South America, North America, and Australia. So I was, I had clients in Australia, I had customers in Mexico, I had customers in Peru, and I had all of the United States. I think I was in all 50 states. And, sometimes you get one customer here, one customer there, but you're still in all these states, right? And, the best people for my business was I was really good at finding the old bookmaker that was a pen and paper kind of guy, old school guy. And I would approach him and be like, listen, this is not practical. This day and age, there's a phone you can bet on, or you can use the application. So I'm going to provide you an application. So your customers in New Orleans, like my best customer was in New Orleans. He was a bookie, old school bookie. He was a dinosaur. Everything was by pen and paper. He had a call center where they would call in New Orleans and place the wager. And he had people working at the call center. I'm like, man, that's ridiculous. You're doing way too much work. And everything was written down. And he had to grade everything by hand. I'm like, dude, I have it figured out for you. I said, I'm going to grow your business. I said, let me handle it. And it was hard to try to teach a dinosaur, new tricks, right? It's hard. What they say, it's hard to teach an old dog new tricks. So I flew out to New Orleans and I showed him, look, I'm Beto Dog. This is your username for your customers. We're going to have all 50 of your customers, all 100 of your customers, whatever you have. We'll put a username and password. Whatever limit you want to give them, we'll give them a limit. You want to give them $1,000 each? That's great. So I would show him how to use the software, and then he'd go to his customers, and next thing you know, all his customers would be like, oh, this is awesome, right? They've never seen this. They've been placing wagers through an 800 number, and the guys are writing it down on the other end. So now all of a sudden, you've got all these customers in New Orleans betting through my app, calling my 800 number that's going back to my office in Costa Rica. And now it spreads like wildfire. Everyone wants to bet on Beto Dog. So that's how I grew the business. I went to old school bookmakers that didn't know the technical side of things. And, I was young, I was ambitious, and that's how I became, nationwide.
What did you run it like a business where you had, you were looking at your monthly numbers, yearly revenues, profit and loss? How sort of sophisticated did you get with that business?
So in the beginning, I was running around like a chicken with my head cut off. I'm not going to lie. And then I ended up, forming an office in Costa Rica where I had someone answering all the phones for my VIP customers. Then I had a call center for all the regular customers that are betting, between $25 and $1,000. And then I had people that would move the lines. So if one side of the spread was -3 Raiders, for instance, and all the money was being bet on the Raiders, I would have someone that would move that line according to my money. Because at the end of the day, you don't want to get caught with your pants down. You want to level it out, because remember, we're charging 10% on each side. So we can't lose if the bets are even. So that's a very important part of this business. In the beginning, it wasn't like that, I'm running around, I don't know anything about the game. So then I have an accountant, and then I have collectors, and then you got stash houses where you keep your money, and you have banks that you need to send money into to take the money out, because you got to remember, if someone wants to pay me in Texas and I'm in California, how am I going to get the money? So, we have certain shell companies that we set up to accept the money, whether it being an ATM business I would have, where people would go deposit cash in the ATM business, and then I'd have people in California that would own the ATM business and pull the cash out for me. So we had to get creative, I had a gold business. People would buy gold and they'd send me gold for payment, so there's no paper trail. So it gets very technical, and you got to be savvy, and you got to try to avoid law enforcement.
Did you have someone that taught you how to do this, or were you pretty much self-taught?
No, I learned in the beginning. I would watch my mentors, and I would watch the way they would structure it. They were a big book offshore in Peru, and I said, okay, they're doing that. I can do something similar, but I don't like the way they're structuring it like that. You know what? There's a paper trail. Okay, they have international wires that they're doing. I don't like that either. But then I saw that they had offshore accounts like in Switzerland and Costa Rica and Peru. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, that's important, because if you can keep your money offshore, that's ideal. But then again, how do you keep your money offshore and pay your customers in the U.S.? So you have to have a stash house that has, at least $500,000 in case someone beats you. And you have to have these stash houses throughout the United States, because your runner is going to go pick up the cash and drop it off in that vicinity. So that's where the logistics got hard for me, and that's where I kind of learned everything on my own.
Do you know what kind of revenue you got to in your peak annual revenue?
Like a good NFL football week was like 300 to 400,000 a week for a good NFL football week. I had $1 million months. Obviously in the gambling empire, right? Once you start talking about the drugs, that's a whole nother scale, because it's a lot more money and it's a lot more riskier, and you get a lot more time.
So you decided to transition your business. What was it? And again, I'm applying it to regular companies, but did you get the business to a size and sort of say, okay, well, fairly complex, limited in terms of the sales opportunities or revenue opportunities. I want to diversify and look for something else? Or was that an opportunity that sort of came to you and you ended up in a sort of a different type of business than what you started?
No, I really never meant to get back involved. Like, I sold, little drugs here and there in college just to get by, right? Just like performance enhancing drugs, just to be able to pay for my way in college, because we didn't have money. So I never meant to come back to this lifestyle, right? The bookmaking was just fine. It was making great money, right? But I wanted to go international with my gambling business. And I started going international as far as, I started taking bets in Mexico. I had a guy in Mexico that was a pen and paper bookie as well, that wanted to use my software. And he had some customers that were too big for him to take the action, that was betting, between 10 and 20,000 a game, and he didn't want that action. So he partnered up with me, and I said, we'll split the action, And next thing you know, he's giving me these big players, and I don't care at the end of the day who the customers are. As long as I'm getting paid, that's not my business, because you, Matthew, are my agent. If you're going to go collect the money from me, I don't care about your customers. Those are your customers, right? So that's what happened. I ended up going to the international level, and I started expanding my business, and I ended up taking bets from an infamous cartel, the biggest cartel in the world. And I didn't know it at the time. And long story short, I got indebted to them, and we lost some of their money by fluke, by accident. Not me personally, but I was responsible for it. And that's kind of how it fell in my lap. And as a child that's been around a dad that's been real strict with, we have integrity and morals and ethics, I knew that if someone loses money and I'm responsible and my face was on the line, I know that I'm responsible to pay it back. So that's what I did. Someone lost my money, but I was the face of this operation, and I did the right thing. And it included me selling, cocaine all over the world. Guess what? I did it. I served my time. I went to prison for it, and I own up to it. And bad people like me that sell drugs, 100% they need to go to prison because it's illegal. And I accept that.
There's a book that tells the full story, and I'm not going to go into that. I recommend people look at the book, and I believe there's potentially a movie deal that.
Yeah, let's hope, man. Fuck, I've been in prison the last 10 years. That would be a blessing if that did happen for sure.
I'm not going to tell the story, but there are some interesting things that I think you ended up getting in the international logistics business, and I'm going to sort of apply it to terms that people are familiar with. Like, what would you say? What was your approach to problem solving? Because you had some really almost like impossible problems to deal with. I'm comparing it to people today where we're dealing with a number of different challenges, from distribution and prices of shipping and getting product to customers at a certain price point. But you had like unbelievable challenges compared to the business that I'm in. What was your approach when you came up to a situation and you had to basically solve a problem? And we don't have to necessarily talk about some of the problems that you solved, but how did you look at those challenges and end up with the various different solutions and test them out and be able to come up with ways to solve problems that would seem impossible even if we would talk about it now?
Good question. Hey, great question, actually. You got to look at the history, right? Let's go back in time and see what problems did these people have in logistics and where do they go wrong, right? And I did that in my business. I studied, right? I studied the Pablo Escobars, the Chapo Guzmans, and I watched their routes. I watched how they handled their logistics and what got caught and what made it through. And for me, I had to study that, okay, if I'm sending in, say, avocados, and my product's going in avocados, and they've already figured out that avocados people are smuggling my product that I was using, the cocaine, you have to realize, okay, they're hip to that. So let's think outside the box. And that's the most important thing. So, why don't we put it in fish? Like, who would ever think that you would have it in the center of a fish? That's a frozen product, right? So things like that, you just got to get creative, right? And it's a lot easier for me to get creative when you owe the cartel $4 million, right? So you got to think outside the box. And whether it was fish I would use or chocolates or, alcohol, whatever it may be, you have to figure out something that A, the DEA is not going to be able to see, and B, that the dogs that the DEA has working for them aren't going to be able to smell. And so it was a lot of homework. It was a lot of seeing what worked and what didn't work. And you got to find someone in business. You got to find someone that's at the top. Like, if I was ever to sell a book, I would go study Jeff Bezos, right? He did it for 20 years and failed, right? He didn't figure it out for that long out of his garage, but he finally figured it out. And I told myself, I want to be the Jeff Bezos of distribution, right? He's doing it with books. I wanted to do it with my product. And that's what I did. I just studied the routes, and I studied what worked and what didn't work. And my percentage was like 99%. The only time I ever got caught was the last package. And that's the only one that ever got picked off.
When you were going through the planning stages, was it something that you were doing in your own head? You sat down with bits of paper? Like, how did you go about understanding and brainstorming and testing and then getting it to a stage where you had a high level of confidence? And I guess for you, the high level of confidence had dire consequences if you made it wrong. Like, for me, if I tried to ship something from China to New York and it went wrong, all right, I lose the container, 20, 30 grand or whatever. But for you, the consequences were a lot more risky. So how did you go through that process, and when did you know to pull the trigger on executing an idea?
Execution is key, but you always have to test it, right? So I would just test it with my product was obviously cocaine. So I would test it with 1 kilo just to see if it makes it, right? So, I would sit in my room and I would have a piece of paper and I would just map it all out. Okay, let's try this way. We're going to do it on this date. We know that customs is not very busy at this time, or we know when Christmas time comes, let's push our product at that time because there's so many packages that are coming in that there's no way they can search through all of our packages. And let's make it look like we're sending a Christmas item. So we have to be creative and we have to plan accordingly, and we have to look at the entire picture. And for me, it's a timing thing for sure, like in any business. And if you lose one, okay, it's just part of doing business. But luckily for me, I never lost any.
You clearly have the ability to handle pressure. Again, there's some interesting stories that are in the book, which kind of I couldn't deal with that. I don't know whether I could deal with that amount of pressure, but certainly you have the ability to cope under a phenomenal amount of pressure. How do you make sure that pressure is working on your side, and how do you avoid pressure pushing you to make decisions that may sort of have dire consequences? Because again, in business, a lot of times everyone's dealing with pressure. We've got to make decisions, but sometimes you can rush a decision and it could have issues if you're not standing back and thinking. And talk me through a little bit about what the way you approach pressure and making decisions, and also being mindful not to allow the moment or the emotion to take control of your logical thought process.
I always say a good business starts with a foundation, right? So it starts with, for me, working out right in the morning. My first thing is I work out, and then putting good things in your body. And if you have that, you have clear mind, right? And as soon as you start drinking alcohol or taking drugs, it alters your mind. And that's where I went wrong, and that's kind of was my downfall. I was using alcohol, using drugs, because I had so much pressure. And if I would have been sober this whole time, I think that clear mindset would have got me a lot further. We probably wouldn't even be in this interview. But unfortunately, went down that path of substance abuse. It's been in my family. My dad was an alcoholic, so it's hereditary, obviously. And I think if you start with that clean mindset and you care about your foundation, which is building from the ground up, every morning working out and getting in that mindset. And it's just clockwork. You become a soldier, and you eat that protein, and you drink that gallon of water, and you get those 8 hours of sleep. I think that makes your business so much more stronger. And that was my mentality. Okay, we need to be clear-minded. In order to be clear-minded, we don't care whether, right now, for instance, I had a 10:30 call, and then I had 11 a.m. meeting with you, this podcast, and I know I have a 3:30 call with my lawyer. But at the end of the day, if you're focused and you're sober and you're thinking clear, you can make anything happen.
Are you clean now?
Yeah, I've been clean for 10 years.
I was chatting to someone about this who did martial arts, and he told me a bit of a story about two people fighting, going back to the sort of samurai days and fighting to the death. They were practicing with each other, and then how much alcohol could you take? Is it a glass? Is it a sip? Is it a sniff? To if you're in a situation where you're fighting to the death, how much does that compromise your ability to win against someone that's of similar physical and technical strength against you? And I'm curious, because you've been through both sides. Where do you sit about substances, whether it's alcohol, cocaine, you name it, and the difference between having none and having a little bit, particularly if you take that to its nth degree of you doing a little bit every day, where can that take you? Is it very slight, or can, as in your cases, the consequences be pretty dramatic?
Great question. For me, I can't do this moderation, right? I tell people, if you want to do it in moderation. But once I have that first beer, I want a cocktail. Once I have that cocktail, I want a line of Coke. Once I have that line of Coke, I want to go gamble on sports. Once I do that, I'm going to go get a hooker. It's just going to snowball. It's a bad, for me, I can't do it. But if you can do it in moderation, that's what I recommend. It'd be great to go out and have a nice steak dinner with you and have a nice glass of wine. But at the end of the day, Matthew, I know that's not going to be enough for me, right? I used to party like a fucking rock star, right? So it's I would just keep chasing that feeling I had, 11 years ago, because that feeling, I felt unstoppable. I felt like Superman.
Coming up next.
You only have two things in life. You have your word and your balls. And what they say, you don't bust those, you don't break those for anybody, right? Anywhere I went in prison, I just found the salt guy. And that's how I built my brand. And in prison, it was called Kingpin Creamery, because everyone knew I was a kingpin. If you look good, you feel good. If you feel good, you look good. And he says, if you look like money, you're gonna make money. Trust no one but yourself. Because at the end of the day, it's going to be you that makes the decision.
I want to sort of change direction a little bit. You clearly had some fun, and without glamorizing the bad side of it, you know, what someone who didn't grow up without having any money and then suddenly ended up with a huge amount of money. Like, what was the biggest night that you had? How much did you spend, and what were some of the really extravagant things that you spent money on?
Man, I hate talking about this, because you got to remember, I came from nothing. Like I said, the son of a construction worker, right? So growing up with never having anything and watching my dad being so frugal, you know, I hate to talk about it, but you know, I remember when I became a millionaire at 27 years old. And you've never got to treat yourself, right, to anything in life. And I remember one day I got a Richard Mille watch, which was $150,000. I reserved a yacht for a week in Miami, which was another $150,000. And I bought my girlfriend a Birkin bag from Hermes, which was, I think, $50,000 at the time. So I just spent $350,000 in one day. But I've never had anything in life. So for me, it was like, wow, let's. People are like, oh, you just party with your money. And I'm just like, when you come from nothing, it's just like, you got to do it once in a while, right? You got to enjoy life once in a blue moon, and never having, you know, 2 quarters to rub as a child. It was a surreal feeling to have that kind of money and be a millionaire at 27 years old. I'm like, okay, let's enjoy life a little bit, right? The money's coming in so fast, you can't even spend it.
Were there any other like, did you like cars or anything else like that?
Yeah, of course. I love cars. I remember I spent $250,000 on this. It was called a mobile office, right? It was like a Cadillac Escalade. And inside, it was stripped out, and it had 2 seats in it with jet seats, so you felt like you were in a jet. And it had a laptop that comes out of the side. It had a full bar, and what the driver would slide down, you'd see the driver, and you'd have this like 32-inch screen that you could use for your computer. And I remember I spent $250,000 on it, and I got the same thing in Mexico and had it bulletproofed, you know. So I just like that. I like feeling like a boss, right? So I would pick up clients to take them golfing at like Pelican Hill and Newport Beach, and I'd send my driver and I say, hey, go pick up Ricky in Corona Del Mar, and you know, let's take him for a round of golf, right? So Ricky would get in there and he'd be feeling like the biggest VIP customer ever, you know? And these guys are losing $250,000 a year to me in gambling, so why not give them that VIP treatment?
Did you have any legendary parties that you can remember?
Man, I think the most legendary party would have been at the Playboy Mansion. We won the national championship, and Hugh Hefner invited the whole team. And I remember, man, I was like, 20 years old. It was me and my tight end unit, and Matt Leinart was there, the quarterback, my fullback, Brandon Hancock, and we had the time of our lives, you know.
Where was his mansion?
His Playboy Mansion was in like Brentwood, and he had like monkeys and toucans, and he had every kind of animal you'd think of in this. It was beautiful, and I think of that. I think of the Maximum parties we were invited to. You know, remember when Maximum magazine was big back in the day? And like I said, when you're playing at that level and you're part of this USC national championship football team, the doors open everywhere you go in life.
Were you, when you got involved with the cartel, was that like what you watch on the movies? Was it parties and that, or was that just serious business?
No, in the beginning it was serious business, and then once the cartels realizes that I'm a businessman and they see what I can do, you know, it's hey, can you bring some merchandise for us? Can you know, you got to remember the cartel, they're not allowed to leave Mexico. They're not allowed to travel, obviously, because most of them are wanted. So sometimes they ask me to bring the party to them, right? Go to Las Vegas and pick $50,000 in Louis Vuitton and Hermes and Gucci and grab merchandise from all those stores and put it in a private jet and fly with 10 girls from Hollywood and come come visit us, and it's all expense paid. So you got these women that are like, fuck yeah, we're getting Gucci and Louis Vuitton and Hermes. And, I'm lying to them and telling them, hey, you want to meet these real estate developers in Mexico. I'm not telling them these are cartel guys. And at the end of the day, these are businessmen. They're just like you and I. You wouldn't know unless they told you. But we're all here to make money. And it's just they chose a different way to make money.
What was most, I guess, try to think of the best words. Like what was sort of most mind blowing about like what they built, whether what they own, like what they did? Because I guess for anyone it's difficult to even imagine. Like you only see it in movies, and you in the movies they seem like they've got these big impressive houses and stuff. Like, was there anything that when you went into that, you at any point you were just mind blown at what you were seeing at any point?
Yeah, I've been to the compound of these guys. Compounds. We're talking 30, 40,000 square foot houses on lots that are acres and acres, and, have the most extravagant cars and watches and, alcohol bottles, Louis the 13, these Class A Exul Ultra tequilas, that's like $5,000 a bottle. And you see all these nice things, and then you go see their animals. And I remember I had to bring the cartel boss it was a baby tiger, and it was this white tiger I had to pick up in Tijuana. And he flew his private jet in Tijuana airport for me. And I was like so nervous. I was like, man, is like PETA gonna arrest me right now? Like this is like, this is pretty crazy. He's having me pick up this baby cub, right? And I remember putting it in this Louis Vuitton duffel bag and getting on his private plane. I was like, holy shit, what am I doing right now, right? This is a little baby cub. And then you get there and it's like a zoo, right? It's like, wow. They just really want the most exotic things, the most exclusive things. Like in prison, like if you have a nice watch that's not sold on the commissary, that's exclusive, right? And you're willing to pay whatever for it. And it's the same thing for these gangsters. They want a AK-47 that has diamond encrusted, or a Louis Vuitton, embezzled, and that's the life they live. That's what they want. They have enough money to pay for anything. And I remember getting a gift. I got this Louis Vuitton AK-47 when I made my first $1 million for the cartel. And it had a Louis Vuitton, a handle, and it was all silver plated. It was like a white gold, actually. It was beautiful.
What was that? What had that been worth?
Oh, I would say it's white gold plated. I would say at least 50,000, And he took out all the...
That must have been a one of a kind.
Yeah, one of a kind. It was custom made. And I remember I kept it in my office in my Redondo Beach home. And it was just like a trophy, right? And no one knew what I was doing. Everyone thought I was in the gambling business, but it was like, that was my little secret trophy.
You seem someone that has the ability to read people, influence, and obviously kind of create relationships. We met and sort of had a great feeling about each other, and you're just a warm, welcoming guy. When you were dealing with people that you like the cartel, and you knew the business that we're in, and you knew how dangerous they were, how did you approach those relationships? How did you? I guess in some ways you don't want to be too intimidated, but there's got to be this balance that you have with those people. But how did you, from a psychological perspective, what was it like dealing with creating relationships and rapport with those people, and being able to sort of stand firm when you needed to stand firm, but also follow orders when you needed to?
You go in those meetings and you got to realize, like, you have no fear, right? You only have two things in life. You have your word and your balls. And what they say, you don't break those for anybody, right? So you go into these meetings, and for me, I just have to be myself, right? You got to be honest, right? You don't want to try to hide anything. So honesty is key in any kind of business relationship. I say transparency is important. So I remember speaking to the cartel bosses, and I had to be transparent. Yeah, I lost their money. I understand that. I understand you have these sicarios, these guys that are killers that they kill for a living that could kill me right now. But at the end of the day, what's good is it going to do if they kill me? Then you don't get your money. I'm somebody that's worth a lot more than $4 million. I'm someone that can make you the $4 million for 10 years, and make you $40 million over a lifetime, whatever it may be. You just have to look at who I am as a businessman and an entrepreneur.
confidence is something that in business, I guess, holds a lot of people back. Self-doubt, not sure whether they can actually start a business and be successful. What gave you the confidence where you could sit and you appreciated your value in a way where it's like, okay, I'm worth more than 4 million. I'm worth 4 million for the next 10 years. Clearly, you have no way of proving that outside of self-belief. Like, what gave you that belief and confidence in yourself to be able to, one, be able to know that you could pull it off and convince someone like that?
You know, my whole life being the underdog and knowing I've been able to succeed in sports and in relationships and education and understanding, like, you're going to get knocked down in life. But if you get up and you keep trying, guess what? One day you're going to knock that guy out. And for me, that's what it was. Every time I got knocked down, I kept getting up, and I never gave up on myself. And that's important. I tell people the government, was like Mike Tyson. You're going in the ring with Mike Tyson, and you're going to get knocked out, and it's going to fucking hurt, right? But I never got knocked out. I did get knocked down a few times, right? I feel like it's a 12-round fight. So you may get knocked down. You may lose the first 6 rounds, but guess what? There's 6 fucking more. So guess what? You never know what can happen. So keep getting up, because you might hit him with the left hook and he might drop. And that's how you got to look at life. No matter what life throws at you, you got to get up and you got to keep fighting, because it's your life, no one else's. You
clearly got knocked out, not in the 12th round, but you did got knocked out, paid the price. Have you been able to... obviously, you mentioned earlier it was a very difficult situation, but have you managed to keep that fight in you? You've got another business now. Have you been able to sort of maintain that confidence and that fight that you had back then?
I'm not going to lie, Matthew. It's been very difficult, right? I get out of prison. I'm still currently living under the bureau custody. I'm living in a halfway house, right? And you forget how to make money, right? It's been so long. And you have no confidence in yourself because it came so easy. You got to remember, if I was making $1 million a day and you get out of prison and you can't even make a quarter, like, it's not a very good feeling. And as a man who likes to provide for his family, likes to make money and be able to take a nice girl out and give her some nice things, it just feels like that's how life's supposed to be, right? You're supposed to take care of your loved ones. And for me, it was the most humbling experience to come out and not be able to make money again. And that's what I've been dealing with. And, you just got to realize you got to use what you have. I knew I didn't have any money. The government took everything. So I'm like, okay, what can I get into? I can't get into real estate. You need money to buy real estate. So I picked a product that was very little on the expensive side. I picked an ice cream, something that I had already made in prison that was already making me a lot of money in prison. Like, who would ever thought you could make ice cream in prison and charge $15 for a peanut butter jar full of it, right? So I knew this recipe was good. And when I got out of prison, I said, well, I have no money, but, I saved some money when I was selling my ice cream in prison. And that's what I did. I used those resources, and I just started looking. I started to see who could make the ice cream. And I said, let's start small, we'll put it on a stick, right? And I went to like 10 different manufacturers that make these Mexican ice creams. They're called paletas, right? And I'm like, okay. As a child, I used to see the little ice cream man push this push cart around selling these things for like $2. So I said, if those were $2, they probably are only 50 cents to make, right? So I said, I know I got 50 cents. So I'm going to start small, I think I had $10,000 when I got out of prison. And I took that money and I invested in this ice cream business. And I started this, protein ice cream. And I went to 10 different manufacturers, and no one believed in me. They didn't want to do business with me. It wasn't worth their time. And I finally found a manufacturer. I gave him the book. I said, here's the book. You can read it if you want, but I'm going to tell you, I'm a man of my word. And I promise you'll get every dollar from me and more. I said, I know how to make money. And if you team up with me, I guarantee we're going to make money. And the guy believed in me. I came back the next week. He goes, man, I read your story. He says, it's incredible. He goes, your work ethic's insane. He says, I want to do business with you. And we shook hands, and we started working on this ever since. And, it started with me in this kitchen at the halfway house, blending up the product and taking the product with the protein and the yogurt and the ice cream mix and the Greek yogurt and strawberries, and I'm blending it up, and then I'm driving over to the manufacturer and I'm pouring it in his molds and locking it up and freezing it and trying it. And it took 6 months to figure out the flavors. And I finally figured out the product, and I'm like, okay, now I need to figure out the packaging. And it's like anything in life. If you're given lemons, make lemonade, right? So I knew I didn't have money, so I had to start small. And maybe one day this will get big. And like I tell people, in the business I used to be in, I started small, right? And it blew up, and I became this kingpin. So in this game of ice cream, maybe I'll become a kingpin on ice cream.
You came up with the idea, I believe, when you were actually in prison. Is that correct?
Yes, when I was incarcerated. It was by accident.
So tell us about that.
So every time I'd work out, I'd always come back to my cell and I would have a protein shake. And the way I made my protein shake is we were able to buy protein off the commissary, these packs. And I would take the milk from the kitchen and I'd pour it in a peanut butter jar and I'd pour the protein pack in there. And then I would slice bananas and I'd put them inside the peanut butter jar. And then I'd take a little swirl of peanut butter and I'd shake it all up. And I just put it on, I had this trash can. In prison, you don't have refrigeration, so I had to fill the trash can up with ice. And you just get back from your workout and you chug your shake, right? It kind of feels like after a workout at Gold's Gym when you go to the smoothie bar, right? So people always say, man, like, you're so dedicated to your workouts. I said, listen, I may be currently in prison right now physically, but my mind is not. Like, everything I'm doing here in this prison, I don't even know I'm in prison. Like, that's how I make my mindset work. So when I'm having that shake, I'm thinking of Gold's Gym in Redondo Beach as a kid, drinking it at the smoothie bar. Like, the government's not fucking with my head. I'm going to fuck with theirs. So I would drink that shake and I wouldn't even feel like I'm in prison. I'd go work out with my buddies and I'd feel like I'm working out with my buddies from home. So with that mindset, I would always make my shake. I'd have 3 a day. And eventually, one day, there was no ice in the ice machine and we had just a little left over, right? And I was like, fuck, man, what are we going to do now? Like, I'm not going to be able to have my shake, like, cold. And my cellie goes, no, just put a little rock salt or just put a little salt, right? He says, oh, keep it cold. So I get back from my workout, I go to grab it and it's frozen. I'm like, motherfucker, how am I supposed to drink this now? It's frozen. My cellie goes, just eat it, man. It'll be like ice cream. So I started eating and I think, holy shit, I think we're onto something, right? And then I said, you know what? All my workout partners, I got a Navy SEAL that I'm working out with, a Marine, and this Cartel guy, right? They're always, every Sunday we have this party together and they make these cheesecakes full of creamer, full of cheese. It's just terrible for you, right? I'm like, I'm tired of eating this bullshit. So one day I said, you know what, guys, no more cheesecakes. I said, I'm going to bring a dessert for you. I want you guys to tell me how you like it. So I remember making 4 of these ice creams, these protein ice creams. And I made them in a mop bucket. I took a plastic bag and I lined it. And I put a bunch of ice, a bunch of salt. I made my shakes. I shook them up, put them in there. And for like 2 hours, I'd have a guy just constantly moving the ice. And then 2 hours later, he'd move it again. And after 4 hours, those things would lock up. And I would come back from our workout and I'd go grab them. And I ran to the yard and I gave everyone one. I gave them a spoon and I try it. And they're like, they started eating it. They're like, holy shit, dude, this is ice cream. We've never had ice cream in prison, right? It's unheard of. I'm like, does it taste good, really? Like, are they just bullshitting me, right? And they're like, no, it tastes amazing. So I always knew I had this ability to make something that was exclusive in prison. And my whole prison bid, that's what I did. I started making this ice cream. And everywhere I went, I would try to get a contract with the people that had the salt, because the salt's the most important part. And I would monopolize the salt game. I'd go to the guy that provided the salt. It's usually like a facilities where they take care of the whole prison. And one inmate takes care of all the salt supply. And the salt is used for snow. So if it's snowing, they put the salt on the concrete and it melts it. So I'd go to the guy and I say, listen here. I said, Jesse, you are the salt guy. I have an agreement that I want to make with you. I said, how does $20 a month, or $20, it was $20 a week sound? You give me all your salt that you have extra of. I said, and this is the catch. Every time I make ice cream, you get 1 ice cream. I said, I'm going to make an ice cream every week for you. He goes, so you're going to get 4 ice creams. That's worth $15 each. And you're going to get $20 each week for the salt. And I said, if anybody comes to you and asks for salt, tell them they have to purchase it through me, Owen. He's like, okay. So guys started trying to buy it from Jesse, trying to give him more money. And he's like, no, you got to go talk to Owen. So what I would do is I would say, okay, you guys want the salt? No problem. Here's a peanut butter jar. It's $15 because I know that one peanut butter jar is only going to make them one ice cream, or they could buy the ice cream from me for $15. So I knew I had it monopolized where they wouldn't be able to be profitable. They can make their own ice cream if they want, go for it. But guess what? I just made $15 off a peanut butter jar. So I learned to monopolize the market, and anywhere I went in prison, I just found the salt guy. And that's how I built my brand. And in prison, it was called Kingpin Creamery because everyone knew I was a kingpin. And I would have my peanut butter jars engraved where the guy would take a needle, a sewing needle in prison, and he'd pick out the lettering that says Kingpin. It would take him like 3 days, creamery. And he'd do it for an ice cream. And I'd have these 10 jars laid out, and that's how I'd make them. And it was just all about appearance, right? Everyone likes to see something that, is different.
You use the word appearance, and I think the reason we're sitting here is because we went to the Fit Expo. My wife, two children were there, and your appearance was the team, the guys we met, your Dutch colleague who I think set us up actually. You've got this, I guess, electric, engaging sort of brand, and everything from your website, your social media, the clothing you wear. Where did that come from? Because that doesn't happen by accident. I know you work with great agencies, but there's definitely, like, even in the way you present yourself, there's definitely something that must be in your mind that takes a lot of care and thought in terms of appearance and the message that you're giving out to people.
My first job out of college was with this USC alumni, and he always told me, if you look good, you feel good. If you feel good, you look good. And he says, if you look like money, you're going to make money. So I always told myself, I got to look like money to make money. And I always had this California kid vibe, right? So the aesthetics of California and Miami kind of go together, right? These bright colors, baby blue, pink, mint green, Tiffany green, all these colors. And you want to be noticed, right? You want people to say, oh yeah, the California Ice Protein, I remember that brand. They all had matching jumpsuits, or their aesthetics were unbelievable. They had palm trees and they had these ice cream push carts. You want them to remember that brand. So when they see California, they always put California with those good-looking people. We had 4 beautiful girls working and guys that are in shape. So it's all about image. It's all about, the better you look and the more fit you are, the more money you're going to make. And that's how I believe in life in general. Taking
into consideration some of the things we've talked about, marketing, innovative distribution of difficult products to ship, getting control of the supply chain. Like, what do you tell us a little bit about the business model, what you've put together, and what your ambitions for the brand is, and where you think you can really take it?
My ambition from day one has been, I want to be the ice cream bar all over every gym, every nutrition store. Those need to be my target audience, right? Because who can say they go to the gym and buy ice cream? But what if you have protein ice cream? Maybe people would buy it, right? Because it's healthy. And I said to myself, who's done it best in this fitness world? And I think back to a company called Quest Nutrition, and the guy
Tom Billiard, who was
genius, right? And you never thought it would make it, right? I remember before my arrest, I was eating these bars, and they tasted so good, but it's just a protein bar, right? But his packaging was cool because he would have like cookie dough on it, and then it would be like cookie dough protein bar. So it was appealing to the eye because you would see that. And I said to myself, okay, I want to be the Quest of ice cream. That guy took his company from $1 million and sold it for $1 billion. I said, that's where I want to be, right? But you got to build a team. So what better way to build a team than find the guy that worked with Quest, right? And that's one of the ways, I started this. I was at the Fitness Expo, one of the guys that brought that company to where it became, a $1 billion company was there. And I told these girls that knew him, I kept telling them, I want to meet Bruce. Right?
He's a great guy.
Yeah, he's awesome, right? And now they're legends, right? They're legendary foods now. And I said, I got to meet that guy, man. I want to pick his brain, right? And these girls that knew him, they're always like, just tell us when you want to meet Bruce. I'm like, I'm not ready. Because remember, I had no confidence. I'm still in this prison mentality. Like, I'm nervous because the brand's not there yet. I didn't feel like it was there. So when I was able to reach out to my friend on the East Coast, Roland, and he helped me with Dan at Creative Growth, and we were able to build this brand. And I was like, okay, we're putting it together where it's starting to feel like a brand. It's starting to look like a brand. So I was, packaging these things in the garage, right? My friend's garage, I was like packaging them and vacuum sealing them. And like, I have footage of this. It's insane. And finally, the manufacturer's telling me, no, we can order bags for you, we can do all that. But I didn't have the money, right? So, you're calling your dad and you're like, Dad, please, man, this is my chance. Like, can you just buy the bags, right? And I remember asking my dad for a $10,000 loan. It was so humiliating, right? You're 42 years old and you're asking your dad for money. And my dad's, the whole time I was in prison, putting money on my books so I can afford my commissary. And it's a hard pill to swallow because the government took everything from you, but your loved ones are there for you for forever, right? So my dad, he bit the bullet and he gave me $10,000 to make my first purchase of bags, and I ordered 10,000 bags of each flavor, 14 flavors. So I have 140,000 bags now to make the ice cream. And so that's where it started, and we'll have an ice cream together, and you'll see the packaging, and it's unreal.
Clearly, there's a lot of, as we've talked through it, you've learned so much, you've been through so much. It's probably it's probably a degree course on its own. Some of the things that you've learned, and there's a huge amount of things I would even apply to my own business by the way that you've approached this. But when you look back on the good and the bad, and I'm particularly talking probably for people, maybe younger people that have those similar aspirations to you. They want to make money, they want to be successful. But clearly, there's ways of doing about it. What are your lessons, and what are some of the things you think for anyone that's listening would be important to take away that's probably the 21-year-old version of you back then?
I would say number one is believe in yourself, right? Trust no one but yourself, because at the end of the day, it's going to be you that makes the decision whether you're going to go the distance with this company or fall in a hole and not succeed. So you got to believe in yourself always. That's number one. And then you got to surround yourself with healthy peers, good environment of people that have, common knowledge with it. And you don't want to be around people that are using drugs or, going out at night and partying. And you want to surround yourself with a healthy environment that have already been successful. I always tell people, like, if you can get someone that's already made money in that field, why not try to get him, and if he's going to do it for sweat equity, give him a nice percentage, right? Because he's done it. It's proven. And don't be scared. Don't be afraid to give percentages to people that are valuable to the company. And I always tell people, like, even if you have, say 20% of a company, it's better than having a company, 20% of a company that's not making money, right? So like people, I always compare like, oh, I only have 5% of this company, but listen, Jeff Bezos has 8% of Amazon, and he's the second richest man in the world. So you can't look at it like, oh, I need to have the whole thing. It's better to divvy it up and surround yourself with people that have been successful in that field and build a team, because it's all about teamwork.
My final question, Owen, escape your limits is about escaping what you've believed is impossible and gone on to make possible. Outside of what we've spoken about here today, what would be a memorable example of where you've had to escape your personal limits?
I mean, I think you got to go back to that day I walked onto the USC football team, right? You've never played the game in your life. You've been an athlete your whole life, so you have that athletic ability to do anything. And if you're an athlete, you're determined to be competitive your whole entire life, and you're willing to do whatever it takes to be a winner, right? Because no one likes to lose. So I think that would be that day when I went to that walk-on, and there's 50 guys that were like all Americans from high school and junior college, and everyone's wearing cleats, right? Football cleats. And I show up wearing my volleyball shoes, right? I don't know any better. And you're like, okay, you think to yourself, well, there goes that tryout, right? You're going to slip, you're going to fall. You might as well just go back to the locker room, right? And you got to think to yourself, no, it's okay. Like, we make mistakes in life. Let's just shake it off, and let's see what we can do with it. And I remember that day, there was 50 guys. And a week later, when they posted who made the team, there was one guy on that list, and that was me, Owen Hanson.
Thanks for your time,
Yeah,
Owen.
that was great. Hey, we got to eat some ice cream for the thing. Hey,